Chapter 13. Sarah stood beside the dais, one hand on its frame to steady herself. Alan had the Zode running at maybe 2 knots, as though they were stalking the buoy, rather than approaching it. The late afternoon sun would set in 2 or 3 hours. As much as she feared being on the ocean in the darkness, she couldn't help wanting to see the sunset over the water with nothing between her and it. Should be spectacular, she thought. So what's wrong with Hippie? Sarah asked. Alan kept his eyes on the water. High fever, ashen skin, barely making any sense. Sarah quickly reviewed their mission in her mind. Phosphorus poisoning? Dunno. Maybe one of the bones got infected as something else got in his open cuts. Yossi shook his head. No fucking clue. How did the cuts look? Sarah asked. Like shrapnel. Hot shrapnel. Burned right through his suit in places and then cut his skin. Shouldn't have been any shrapnel. I mean, there was little more than wood in there. And nails and screws and a steel frame, Alan said. That was a damned big explosion. Sarah nodded dumbly. That's why it could have been phosphorus, I guess. Can't imagine anything else surviving inside the church. She thought back to the ROV's footage. At least not based on what the ROV showed us. He stared at the buoy. I know you didn't really see it, since you got slammed by the pew and all, but the walls just sort of expanded and then imploded, the rest of the structure crumbling into itself. He stole a glance at her, a grim smile on his face. Like watching a demolition. Sarah chuckled. Kind of was. They fell silent as the buoy grew large enough for her to see the attached cables. The blinking white light atop the buoy was barely visible in the bright sunlight, but she knew that would change. The flashing warning light might be their only illumination in an hour or two. Alan slowed the Zode and brought it within a few meters of the buoy. He dropped the anchor, checked the boat's various status lights, and killed the engine. Island birds called to one another, their songs barely audible over the lapping waves. Sarah cast her eyes on the beautiful but damaged island. What she wouldn't give to have seen all of this before the 2020s and the rapid ocean rise. Well, that and before the quakes savaged the topography. Good fishing here? She asked. Not sure about here. Still plenty to catch in the deep ocean. I know some good fish come through the atoll, but I've no idea what they are. Some tour guide you are. Alan grinned at her. Next mission, I'll brush up on local history and conditions. He pointed at her. Just for you. The look on his face lay somewhere between satiric evil and failed comedy. Regardless, it made her smile. Don't take this the wrong way, but hopefully this is my last mission with the animals. Alan pursed his lips. You'd be surprised how many external embedded resources say that. If they survive, Sarah muttered loud enough to ensure Alan heard her. Think we're 5 for 6 so far. You're number 7 if I remember correctly. Lucky number? Alan looked her up and down. Remains to be seen. Uh-huh. Perhaps we'll find out later. Oh, we'll find out, Alan said. You'll be considered lucky if we don't get eaten. She thought about flirting with him some more, but decided that she had to wait, maybe for a time when they weren't floating above where M2 could be hiding. Besides, they were supposed to be watching monitors. Hey, who's watching our backs on the ship? Sarah asked. Good question, but I'm guessing it'll be Kojo if Hoppa needs Rags' help with Hippie. He looked at the 2 monitors set up on the dais. They should give me an update at the top of the hour. Sarah sighed. Should have brought a book. Should have, Alan said, his eyes fixed on the monitors. I see fish have returned around the church. Around? Sarah asked. What do you mean around? He leaned back into the dais's portable seat. Take a look. Sarah leaned in and studied the monitors, looking for movement. The cameras caught sight of fish outside the rough circular camera UV light arrays that Kojo and Rags had placed. She could see entire schools past the church's rubble pile. Each camera showed much the same. Life was moving back into the area, or perhaps it had never really left. Yet all of it was beyond the light array boundary. Why? Get the feeling they're trying to stay away from something? Alan nodded. Maybe they know a thing about M2 we don't. Can sense it? Something like that? He shrugged and leaned forward as Sarah pulled back from the monitors. He stared at the monitor again, willing for changes in the rubble pile. Dunno. Maybe it's the phosphorus pollution keeping them away. He raised his hands in frustration. Could really be anything. Where's a marine biologist when you need one? Alan rolled his eyes. I'll ask K&B to send one immediately. She thought for a moment. Would they? No, not unless they have one in their pocket. Plus, this mission should be over by the time they could get here. I doubt there are many we could pilfer from P&G. Would have to get them from Australia, New Zealand, or maybe even Indonesia. Not going to happen. A long moment passed. Even without leaning in, Sarah had a good view of most of the video windows displaying the camera views. The schools of fish disappeared and other fish took their place. Predators and prey wandering the ocean together, each looking for food, a place to lay their eggs, or perhaps just living. Binary existence that. Eat or die. Humans suffered from the same constraints but could manufacture food, change their environments over brief periods, create medicines, and develop surgeries and new treatments for illness and disease. Humans had a lot of shit to think about and do these days. Enough to drive entire populations mad, she thought. In a way, she envied that binary existence, the mindless routine that couldn't be said to be pleasurable, but couldn't be said to be torture. Just existence. She was willing to bet fish didn't have nightmares. Lucky bastards. After 15 minutes, they traded off, with her sitting in the dais chair while Alan leaned against the frame, arms crossed, eyes studying the monitor windows he could see. It was about as fascinating as watching paint dry. There was nothing to see except the occasional fish swimming beyond the light array boundary. She'd expected crabs and other crustaceans to come into view as they scurried across the ocean floor, but none did. The place is poisoned and they know it, she thought. As much as she wanted the phosphorus to be the cause of their caution, she knew it wasn't. M2 was somewhere in that rubble. Near the end of her shift, the radio came to life.
"This too salty,"
Kojo's voice said. Alan picked up the transmitter. "Salty here. Sit rep."
"All quiet on the monitors,"
Kojo said.
"Hippie's very sick,"
he said after a pause.
"Harper wants to life flight him."
Sarah frowned before shaking her head. "No." Alan looked at her, a question on his lips. He keyed the transmitter. "Stand by." He cleared his throat and glared at Sarah. "What do you mean, no?" She licked a sheen of sweat from her upper lip. "He could be infected." "With phosphorus?" "Yeah, No," she said. "With him, too." Alan opened his mouth to say something, but slowly closed it. His eyes softened, and he looked at the ocean beyond her. She could practically see his mind working and hear his internal voices arguing. Finally, he pressed the transmitter again. "Nist, this is Salty. No on life flight." He released the key and ground his teeth. A long pause played out, the low waves rocking the boat pleasantly. When Kojo finally spoke, she heard the pain in his voice.
"Very sick. May not make it through the night."
Alan nodded as if his comrade could see him. "Copy, Nist. No on life flight. Repeat order." No pause this time.
"No on life flight. Copy."
"Contact me if the situation changes," Alan said. "Salty out." Alan replaced the transmitter on its hook. Sarah noticed how his knuckles had gone white as he tightened his grip on the transmitter while telling Kojo to let Hippie die. Alan's eyes returned to the monitors. A tense silence followed. Sarah, desperate to break the air of shared self-loathing, asked, "Why Salty?" "What?" "Salty, your call sign. What's a salty?" Alan grew a thin smile. "A salty is a saltwater crocodile. The females have nests." He shrugged. "Good enough call signs for individual craft." "Aren't saltwater crocs dangerous?" "Yes, and we're the animals," Alan said. "We are too." Sunlight slowly drained from the sky while they watched and waited. When Sarah's stomach grumbled, Alan pointed to the rear of the boat. "Cooler back there. Dinner and drinks. Help yourself." "Oh," she said. "Do you need something?" He looked at her with a sheepish grin. "Sandwich and something caffeine heavy." "Got it," Sarah said, and strode to the back of the Zode. The cooler, large enough to hold a modest lunch and refreshments for a few people, was stuffed with supplies. She saw several cans of cold coffee energy drinks, bottles of water, a pile of sandwiches, and a bag of nuts, raisins, and candy all mixed together. "Gorp?" she said aloud and smiled. She hadn't seen that since childhood. She grabbed 2 sandwiches without looking at the labels and 2 energy drinks. She eyed the water bottles before deciding she already had too much to carry. She returned to the dais, a ridiculously short trip, and handed Ellen a sandwich and one of the drinks. He studied the wax paper briefly and smiled. "I got the tuna. What'd you get?" Sarah read the black, blocky pen writing. "Barbecue shrimp and mackerel." "Oh," he said, smacking his lips. "You're in for a treat." He partially unwrapped his sandwich, took a large bite, and sighed in satisfaction. "Oh, that hits the spot." Following his example, she unwrapped hers and took a small, experimental bite. The barbecued prawns and mackerel had more zest than she'd been prepared for, but her taste buds exploded gratefully, and her stomach growled with anticipation. She and Alan ate in silence, not that it took long for them to wolf down their meals. Alan finished his, popped the top on his drink, and took a long draught. His eyes squeezed shut in distaste, and he wiped a creamy mustache from his lips. "I recommend a chaser of water before you drink this shit," he said, holding the can away from him as if it were a bomb. "That wasn't pleasant." Sarah laughed and took a sip from the can. He hadn't been kidding. The frothy chocolate milkshake-looking liquid tasted like ass as it mixed with the aftertaste of barbecue sauce and fish. The disgusting flavor lasted a few seconds before the coffee chased it away. Sarah felt the sugar offset the carbs and protein in her system, and her nerves sizzled. "Worth it," she said, and took another sip. Alan laughed before taking a slug from his can and pointing at the monitors. "Nothing at all happening." "No," she said, "but it's there somewhere. I know it is." Alan took in a deep breath and slowly exhaled. How could Hippie have gotten infected? "Don't know. Maybe the explosion pushed some M2 out. Droplets? Something like that?" "No, Hippie would have seen that. He didn't mention it. Plus," Alan said, "Rags would have seen it too." How else could M2 have gotten to him? Maybe a piece of debris coated with the creature? Or did a dot of the stuff survive long enough to burn into Hippie's skin? Christ, how large could it have been? Microscopic? "You're assuming it's M2 and not phosphorus," she told herself. "You've no proof it's M2. "No," she told the voice, "and I don't have any proof it's not." It didn't matter in the long term anyway. Hippie would either survive the night and be better tomorrow, or die on the ship, his body more than likely tossed to the fish. God, that was grim. But what else could be done? If more were here, she'd already have the entire ship quarantined, followed quickly by a bullet to Hippie's skull and a trip to the crematorium. Life flight? Fucking joke. Moore would probably have the damn thing shot down the moment she got word of what the animals had planned. No, Hippie wasn't leaving the ship unless he was upright, talking, and no longer burning with fever. Until then, they were all assumed to be infected. No help was coming, and none would be. The sun had dropped much lower in the sky, its bottom nearly touching the low peaks of New Britain. The yellowish light became a fiery orange, and the few clouds in the sky appeared to be on fire. The yellowish light turned orange, and the few clouds in the sky appeared to be on fire. For a moment, Sarah forgot she was sitting above an alien creature that could kill her. She forgot that one of the animals was sick and probably infected with M2. She also forgot about the aches and pains and the migraine biding its time. At that moment, drinking in the sun's glorious daily death, there was no place she'd rather be, and nothing else she wanted to think about. When the sun finally slipped below the horizon, the eastern sky turned from a brilliant azure to a purple that quickly faded to a deep indigo. Stars twinkled in the east while the west still held the sun's dying glow. The buoy's flashing light seemed too bright now. Sarah looked over at the monitors, saw that the floods had kicked on, and returned her gaze to watch Nightfall and wait. Chapter 14. Keko rocked gently on the waves. Hippie stared upward at the nondescript ceiling from his place in the darkened stateroom the animals shared. The stench of something rotten filled his nose, making him want to gag. He'd been dreaming of water cascading over his body, awakening something inside him that desperately wanted out. Was it a dream? Had he heard voices calling to him, or had it only been the fever talking? Hippie coughed once, a wad of gray and black phlegm launching from his mouth and spattering on his blanket-covered chest. Sweating, freezing, lungs rattling as they processed each labored breath, he'd never felt this bad in his life. Even getting shot in the gut or the round that had shattered his left shoulder had nothing on this. Harper had come in earlier, along with Rags. At least he thought they had. Ever since he'd lain down after they destroyed that thing, unreality had been a constant companion. The shockwave from the explosion had sent a cascade of stars across his vision just before his chest burned from the debris that had struck his suit. Fire? Flame? Underwater? Hippie had found himself tumbling, his rebreather and mask slipping just enough to allow in a cupful of water. The liquid had quickly filled his mouth and then his lungs as he struggled to breathe. He'd felt hands at his waist, felt himself flipping, his arms and legs flailing as the panic of drowning took over. The molten pinpricks of pain in his chest were momentarily brushed aside by his body's convulsive attempts to clear the ocean from his lungs. He felt himself rising in the water, a hand tugging at his diving belt, presumably scrabbling to unfasten the weights. In his choked panic, the calm, rational part of Hippie's normally functioning mind had time to wonder, "Why didn't I do that?" The weight around his waist slipped away and something pushed him upward. Hippie, still flailing, still choking, rose to the ocean surface. The moment he broke into raw daylight, he stripped off his rebreather while he puked out the ocean. Rags appeared beside him, trying to keep him from slipping back beneath the gentle waves. "Hippie, I got you." The calm in her voice made a part of his mind smile. Rags always could keep a clear head under fire. She should have been a medic. The thought died as a stab of fiery pain punctured his chest. Hippie tried to shriek, but all that came out was more ocean water. A second later, he managed a ragged, shuddering breath that soothed his burning lungs. Rags squeezed his forearm and continued speaking in that calm, rational, loving voice. "Breathe, Hippie. All okay. Just breathe." The burning ember in his chest slowly dissolved into that of a bee sting, excruciating but bearable. Another breath. "Fuck!" Hippie finally managed through a pant. Rags laughed and flipped him over onto his back. "Just take a minute. We're okay. We got it." We got it. The thing, the black thing, hanging from the ceiling, its many arms slashing and searching for a target. "Got it," he repeated dumbly. One of her gloved hands delicately probed the bleeding holes in his suit. "Took a good one, mate. Didn't see what hit you, but whatever it was, it went right by me. Lucky we both didn't get nailed." Hippie gritted his teeth as the burning sensation returned, almost as if her ministrations were driving the ember further into his flesh. "Stop," he said, his voice weak and phlegmy. She did, her hand hovering just a few centimeters above his damaged wetsuit. "You okay? You got shrapnel." He managed to nod, amazed at how much his neck hurt. The explosion had been like a car wreck, the shockwave smashing into him and making his bones rattle. Every part of his body hurt, but at least he could breathe now. He turned his head to look at her, amazed at how much effort it took. Rags didn't appear much worse for wear, although her wetsuit had more than a few perforations. Unlike him, she didn't seem to be bleeding. "Okay, just help me to the boat," he croaked. "Can you swim?" I can swim," he said, interrupting her. "I think." He let his legs drop back into the water and moved his feet. Good. All of that still worked. He turned in a slow circle, willing his hands and back to cooperate despite the pain. They did so grudgingly, and he swam toward the approaching Zode. Kojo had obviously seen the explosion, or maybe Alan had called him. Either way, Hippie's best friend, the P&G cavalry, was on its way. A tight, tired smile lit the long-haired man's face. Rather than swimming, he kept his body at a loose angle, still unsure whether or not he was ready to attempt a full freestyle. Backstroke would be better, but even that seemed a step too far. He heard Rags splashing behind him, making him feel a little better. His dive partner was in better shape than he was, and she had his back. If anything decided to attack, it'd have to deal with her first. The pain in his chest faded to a dull, throbbing ache, like a burn that had been splashed with cold water. As the pain receded, he felt strong enough to try an actual swim stroke. His shoulders hated it at first, but he quickly warmed the muscles back up and worked out the kinks. He watched Kojo pluck Sarah out of the water. She looked dazed and a bit green, making him wonder how much of the Pacific she'd swallowed. Alan's head bled from a cut, but he looked okay otherwise. Just like him and Rags, Alan's suit appeared to have multiple perforations. What the fuck had been in that church? "You mean apart from the monster?" The thought brought back the memory of eye stalks jutting out from the pool, the black orbs boring into his soul. Hippie shivered and kept swimming. "Just make it 10 meters to the boat, and you can have a rest and figure out what the fuck to do next." After they returned to Keko, Hippie felt much better, almost normal. He still felt the pinprick of pain beneath his left nipple, but it was no doubt nothing more than a cut or shallow puncture. Still, he and Alan had stripped their wetsuits to check one another's cuts. Alan's scalp had taken a hit from a piece of metal, or maybe rock. No way that a piece of wood made a puncture like that. It had taken a single stitch to bind together the skin, and Alan hadn't winced at all. Hippie hadn't expected him to. He'd doctored up all the animals at one time or another, and knew their reactions. Once he finished with Alan, the other man inspected Hippie closely. "Got dinged up a bit, mate," Alan said. "What hit you?" "No idea. After the boom?" He shook his head. "Just got pushed away, I guess. Then I couldn't breathe." Alan nodded and placed antibiotic salve over the cuts. When he noticed the burn mark beneath Hippie's nipple, Alan said, "Got lucky. You nearly got a piercing." Hippie chuckled but recoiled when Alan rubbed the area with the cream. The burn didn't like it, which made no sense. After a moment or two, the burning and itching receded to a dull ache, and finally all but disappeared. "Just another day in the ocean," Hippie croaked. "Nope," Alan said, his fingers probing the stitch on his bald pate. "Never a day like this." Hippie and Alan dressed, leaving their wetsuits to dry out, and headed to the galley where the debriefing occurred. That had been back when Hippie felt hungry, relatively strong, and somewhat at ease. Too bad it hadn't lasted. When Sarah headed for a nap, Rags insisted Hippie do the same. Rest and give the old noggin a chance to reset itself. It seemed like a good idea, and it was. Hippie had been out as soon as his head hit the pillow. When he awakened, Alan stood over him with a concerned look. "You okay, mate?" Hippie tried to speak, but his words came out in a syrupy whisper that sounded nothing like him. After clearing his throat and feeling as though fish hooks dragged the delicate flesh of his trachea, he tried again and managed, "Sick." The worried look on Alan's face deepened, and that's when Hippie knew he must look bad. Real bad. "Okay, sleep. I'll check on you soon." He had fallen asleep again, and dreamed the animals came into the stateroom one at a time to look him over. Silly imagination, Hippie had thought. No way was he in that bad a shape. Something cold and wet touched his forehead, bringing him awake with a start. His eyes opened slowly as if mucus had tried to close them shut. Rags stood over him, her hand holding a wrapped ice pack on his forehead. When she noticed his dreamy gaze, she gave him a forced smile. "Still with me?" "Still here." The words escaped his lips with barely any sound at all. God, but his throat hurt, not to mention his lungs. "Got a hell of a fever," Rags told him. "Going to get you some relief for that. Stay awake for me?" He nodded and managed a sip of room-temperature water to choke down 3 pills. Rags was his medic backup, and while she might not be as trained as he was, she'd always been more than capable. Plus, her bedside manner was impossible to beat. Still, taking the meds had hurt like hell and left him nearly breathless. She'd stayed with him, but he hadn't stayed awake long. Now the brightness through the porthole was quickly fading into twilight as the unseen sun died in the west. Hippie brushed a hand across the sheen of sweat on his forehead, and a large length of hair pulled free from his scalp. He stared at it in fascination as he studied the melted strands. Another brush of his head, and another lock came away. He rubbed his hair-covered hand against the sheet as he tried to remove the matted mass that stuck to his flesh. A wide, dark patch of skin sloughed off his hand, along with the hair, the flesh beneath it even darker. "Phosphorus," he croaked. Had he been exposed to the chemicals in the rounds and been sickened? Was it coursing through his system now, damaging his internal organs and making its way to his brain? "No, you're infected." The thought froze him. The memory of the dark pool of liquid, the tentacles gesticulating before they began ripping through the water, searching for targets, filled his mind. Those black eyes staring at him from deformed tree branches, the crackle and snap as the thing extruded more appendages and eye stalks, had all but melted his brain. The fever had left him shivering, but this was different. He was dying. "Infected," he muttered in a ragged, breathy whisper. Hippie pulled the blanket from his bare legs, and the sound of tearing flesh caught his ears. He looked down and saw loops of his skin adhering to the blanket's underside. He ripped off the blanket, wincing and groaning at the pain as his skin came free. A dark bubble popped near his belly, and blackish liquid dribbled out, something like smoke rising from the skin around it. Hippie should have felt the sizzle of flesh and the sensation of nerves and tissues shooting with pain, but there was nothing. He only felt the hell in his head, the rattling in his chest, and the fever raging inside him. Hippie slid his legs over the bed and tried to stand, the world reeling before righting itself. He reached the hatch and leaned against the bulkhead next to it. "Get away," he said aloud, the words barely audible. What had Sarah said? Best to take the limb if you get infected? Can't amputate the chest, he thought. Hippie ground his teeth as he struggled to flex his fingers and open the hatch. After 3 tries and another dizzy spell that nearly knocked him to the deck, the hatch creaked open. The lamps just outside the staterooms glowed like party lights, his eyes catching glimmers like lens flares. The vision in his left eye wavered before dimming to fuzz. "Get away," he said again, pausing at the steps leading to the galley. He heard that crackling sound again and looked down at his feet. A curl of smoke rose from the dark flesh of his toes. Dark flesh. Hippie, apart from a tan, was as white got, but not any more. He continued up the steps, completely unaware he was naked, and even if he had been, he wouldn't have cared. He slowly climbed the stairs, using his hands on the rail to steady himself. His palm felt slick with sweat, but when he looked at the railing, it was smothered in that dark ichor. The vision in his left eye dimmed to nothing, and he wavered on his feet before pressing a hand against the bulkhead to steady himself. The rail wasn't cutting it. His fingers left more of the ichor in their wake, but he didn't notice. Nor did he notice the smell of varnish melting or the tendrils of smoke rising from the wood. As he reached the landing, he saw Kojo sitting in front of the bank of monitors, his fingers sliding across the tablet every few seconds to change the active feed. There was the hatch leading to the aft, open wide, with a coolish breeze wafting into the galley. Hippie retched and coughed, a wad of phlegm the color and consistency of oil hitting the deck. Kojo flinched and looked over at him. Through his one good eye, he saw the expression on Kojo's face change from surprise to something akin to horror. The only other time Kojo had worn that expression was when one of their former teammates got his head blown off and blood sprayed from the body like a geyser. "Hippie," Kojo sounded afraid. Hippie opened his mouth to speak and 4 teeth clattered to the wooden deck like dice. Kojo moved to rise. "No, brother," Hippie tried to say, but sprayed another few teeth and long drips of oil-colored drool. He smelled burning flesh, and the rot in his nose was overpowering. Kojo was going to try to help him. Kojo would touch him. Kojo, his best friend, would end up like him. Face locked in a silent scream, Hippie staggered as quickly as he could to the hatch. Kojo had reached his feet and was coming after him. Ignoring the pain and doing his best to control his limbs through dying nerves and a decaying brain, Hippie flung the hatch closed as soon as he was on the other side. It wouldn't keep Kojo for long, but it would be long enough. Hippie couldn't possibly make it into the hold to grab one of the phosphorus grenades and immolate himself. Even if he could, he'd set Keko on fire and probably kill the animals. No, he gummed through a mouthful of thick, rancid oil. It burned the back of his throat, his nerves shrieking in their death throes. Something gave way in his chest, and he managed a choked scream. He heard Kojo at the hatch, trying to rush out onto the deck. Hippie wanted to yell at him, tell him to get the fuck away. Couldn't he see what was happening? Hippie quickly stumbled through the twilight to the railing, crying black, oily tears of pain and terror. Just as he heard Kojo's footsteps behind him, Hippie tumbled over the rail and belly flopped into the water. An excruciating pressure built up behind his dead eye, and he shrieked the air from his lungs just as the sound of crunching and sizzling filled his ears. The pressure gave way, and a cloud of blood spurted from the socket, the useless eye spinning in the water before him. Mouth open, his empty lungs struggling for air but only pulling in water, his panicked brain saw something black, stretching from the left side of his face to the right. His remaining eye stared into an orb on the end of what looked like an obsidian bone. The orb spun wildly as it regarded him with alien indifference. Hippie's vision went black at the same time, and his skin split like an overripe melon. Tendrils of black sludge poured out and swallowed his flesh until there was nothing left of him but surgical pins drifting to the ocean floor and a cloud of chunky tar that was quickly transforming into something else. Night had fallen.